when the program is over. And finally, I'd like to introduce this evening Frank Pratt. Frank is a retired DNR fishery biologist, and he will present tonight's talk about Wisconsin fish are in hot water. Frank got his master's degree in fisheries from UMass-Amherst, and then spent the next 38 years in Hayward as a fishery biologist for the Wisconsin DNR in Sawyer County. And please join me in welcoming Frank Pratt.
Let's do a sound check first. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it better this way?
No.
Okay, so I will use the mic. I understand I'm replacing Cortland Lava.
No, they're still going to do it. It's next
Okay.
month.
Let me be frank anyway. The title of my presentation tonight is In-Seine, and it's a little bit of a play on words. Originally titled In-Seine Fish in Hot Water. Just a little bit of an overview and objectives here of what I want to accomplish. I want to just discuss climate change. This is pretty much sponsored by the Citizens Climate Lobby and also Wisconsin Green Fire. And I'm going to be making a lot of mention of the kids at the Northern Waters Environmental School, which is a charter green school associated with the Hayward School District in Hayward, Wisconsin. They did a lot of field work. And what I'm going to do is report on what climate change is doing and might do to our fisheries here in Wisconsin, and what it might mean to you and your children and your children's children. A little bit of emphasis on what we can do, and my main teaching style is to be interactive. So there will be questions and there will be tests. Talk a little bit about the seine net that is mentioned in the title. Back when I started with the DNR in the year 1978, I started doing supplementing some of my boom shark and fyke net surveys with seines, which are a long straight net you pull through the water, particularly good for young of the year fish, particularly good for spawning fish in the right areas. And I did a survey on Lac Courte Oreilles in 1978, targeting cisco as they were spawning. And then, well, many years later, 30 plus years later, repeated the survey with the kids from the Northern Waters Environmental School. We went out and we bought the exact same piece of gear from the exact same manufacturer, the exact specifications of the original seine, and repeated the survey of 1978 in exactly the same places, on exactly the same dates, under exactly the same conditions. So that it's a very good piece of information, and it was very edifying to compare the results of 1978 versus 2016, 17, 18. A little bit more about the seine. What does the Webster's Dictionary say? Secondary meaning is the name of a river which runs through Paris, France. Primary meaning, it's a long straight net that you use to pull through the water to sample fish. So my first question of the night is going to be, who named who? Which came first? Did the net come first, or did the river come first in name?
The river.
So you're going to get a chance to vote now. So far, I've given this presentation 19 times to about 2,000 people. Started here, right here in Stevens Point last March. And so far, the vote is 49% for the river in Paris and 51% for the net. But as we know, voting results are dynamic. As we know, voting results can be hacked. And as we know, sometimes the popular vote doesn't really run the final vote in the electoral college. So, first of all, I'll just conduct a vote in hands, and we'll see what turns out. How many vote for the river in Paris was first, and the net was named after it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We'll double that, and we'll call that the Trump method, and we'll say this twice. It's 13. Okay, how many vote for the net? Looks like about a 2/3 majority. I
What
like
if
that.
there's no connection?
I like that, so let's compare that to reality. Well, the history is that Paris became a settlement in about 320 BC and was actually named Paris and a Roman colony in 52 AD. On the other hand, you can find references to a seine net in Finland and Sweden as long ago as 8300 BC. And actually, when this dude by the name of Jesus Christ came down to the hills at Galilee and commissioned Simon Peter to go out of the water, the net that they used was basically, by description, what would be called a purse seine. You run it out from a boat, you run it in a circle, and then you encircle the fish and pull them up. So the Great Commission started out with a purse seine. So those that said seine, the net, were correct. And the others, you need to go back to school. Therefore, the net trumps the river. Okay, now I'm going to be talking in this talk, I'm going to get in, I'm going to be talking, you're going to hear names of waters you probably haven't heard of down here. But you have parallel waters, that are type waters that you can relate to. Whenever I'm talking the Namekagon River, I'm talking a fairly large trout stream, one that's thermally challenged. And you have streams, a lot of streams down here that fit the bill. The Wolf and Tomorrow River would be two good comparisons to Namekagon. And then I'm talking a lot about the Chippewa flowage, a large dark water flowage on a river system. You've got a lot of fluviages like that right here in the Wisconsin River, Dubay, the Willow fluviages, things like that. And then I might be talking a little bit about Lac Courte Oreilles, a large, mesotrophic, cold water, two-story fishery lake. There aren't too many of those. There's only about 200 in the state of Wisconsin. Around this general area, I'd say think Trout Lake, think Lake Lucerne. Back when I first started out, this guy here, Tom Beard Sr., was a major, well-known, nationally known research biologist in Wisconsin. He worked out of Spooner. He became a good friend of mine. His early research revolved around bluegill spawning dynamics. When they spawned, when that spawn was successful, when it wasn't, what factors were responsible for that. And back in the mid-70s and early 80s, the things that were responsible for bluegill spawning success was basically timing. Any bluegill that was spawned after July 1st virtually had no chance of surviving the Wisconsin winter. A bluegill had to be 3 inches by Labor Day, or their chances of surviving were nil. This is back in the 70s and early 80s. Well documented in a whole bunch of waters. He had an incredible experimental design. We talk about raising accelerated growth walleye by feeding them young of the year bluegill. Tom Beard was doing this in the early 80s. I call it Tom Beard's baby sunfish rule. You need to be spawned before the 1st of July, you need to be 3 inches by September, or you were just not going to survive. Okay, so one of the surprising findings of the Northern Waters Environmental School seine surveys were some of the information we found out about bluegill reproduction now. Every water we went out to on a field trip, we would do a seine haul. A lot of field trips were in the fall, some of them were in the early spring. And so we recorded the number of the number and the size of bluegills in our seine haul. And there was a tremendous difference in our results in 2016, 17, 18 than what Tom Beard had found in the early 80s. This is basically what we're doing. This is Lake Hayward. This is the seine haul in early September, and we are sorting through the results, and there's hundreds and hundreds of little baby panfish in there, and we're looking at the sizes of those fish and how many. And then, again, the Beard rule. We would not expect to find, particularly in the early spring, or even in the late fall, many bluegills of age 0, young of the year or baby fish, that were going to survive, that were under 3 inches. Huh. Not now. Not now. Not now, you can go to virtually any water you want. If it's a bass panfish lake with bass and bluegill, and you're gonna find whether it's the early spring, before the spawning season, or the late fall, well after the spawning season, going into the winter, and you will find a lot of bluegills that are as small as a ½ inch big. And a lot of bass that are well under 3 inches. And what's different from now, right now, in the early 80s, these fish are surviving. Bluegill and bass are having tremendous reproductive success. Not only do they no longer have a longer growing season, but they don't have to be nearly as big to survive the winters anymore. What's going on? Well, the lakes are warming. Since the time when Beer did his research, most of the lakes in Wisconsin have warmed about 1 degree centigrade. That's a huge jump, huge warming. Some of them down around the Milwaukee area, in the southeast corner there, and I do have my phone down in this area, are up in that 1.5 to 2 degree range. So we've had tremendous warming of our waters. And not only have we had tremendous warming, our growing season is now longer. Now what here is on the map here is on the land growing season, which is a little bit shorter than in the water growing season. Because in the water growing season, basically, if the water temperature is above 60 degrees, fish of all species and all thermal characteristics are going to grow. We now have in the water about at least a month, and in some summers, when September is really now a summer month, as much as a 6-week-long extra growing season. Almost have doubled the growing season. And we are now running into fish that are age 0 and young of the year, which are the size of what yearling fish used to be. Bass up to 5 inches, bluegills up to 4 inches, and they're not even 1 year old yet. Huge advantage for the sunfish, climate change, and warming. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that from a fisher's standpoint, from a fishery standpoint, the climate change is an unmitigated disaster, because it is not. It depends upon what group of fish you're in. If you're a sunfish, if you're a true warm water fish, it's never been better. If you're a cold water fish like a trout, a cisco, a salmon, or a cool water fish like a walleye, or northern pike, or yellow perch, the outlook is not good. It's not rosy. Things are going downhill very, very quickly. So the species I would call blast-off species for the next century, those species that are going to excel would be the sunfish, the largemouth bass, the bluegill, a lot of your big minnow species, the creek chub, a lot of your catfish and bullhead species like the channel cat and even the flathead. And I dare not say we have some species that may be as far south as South America that are really tropical or subtropical species now, like some of the piranhas and some of the angelfish. Year 2100, if things keep going like they are now, they may be key species in our fish community. Stunning. This is stunning. And this is February of the year 2017. This is Logan Christensen, one of my students at the Northern Waters Environmental School, fishing below the dam at Hayward. He caught a 45-pound flathead catfish. This is a species that when I first started in 1974, Becker, in his book, Fishes of Wisconsin, said was extremely rare, only found in extreme southeast Wisconsin and in the Mississippi River below Genoa. In that time, in that period, 40-year period, it has expanded its range literally about 300 miles north. So this is a catfish species in the middle of winter in a trout stream in Sawyer County, in an area 300 miles north of where it never, ever was before. If you don't believe climate change, all you have to see is this. and know biologically from the standpoint of distribution that it is an absolute unequivocal fact. Oh, okay. There's the blastoff species again. There's one of the blastoff species, and then there's a circling the drain species. And I need not say, but that includes lake trout, whitefish, brook trout, walleye, brown trout, northern pike. You can add yellow perch to that group as well, and a number of other cool water species like burbot. Our water's just plain getting too warm in the summer. The good old days are back again when it comes to largemouth bass. Largemouth bass are thriving. As you told Rosie on the way down, it's never been better than it is now, right now, for largemouth bass in Wisconsin, and probably smallmouth as well. But there is a dirty little secret involved there. I can't look you straight in the eye and say, largemouth bass are coming on, walleye are going downhill, and it's never been that way before. Actually, most of the lakes that we think in the last 50 years we have called walleye lakes were not, or are not now, and they weren't before because they were introduced. Lakes like Courte, lakes like Trout Lake, lakes like Nelson Lake. Walleye were not originally native to those lakes. They were introduced starting in the 30s, and eventually by the late 50s, early 60s, became naturally reproducing lakes, and for the next 40 to 50 years dominated largemouth bass. But that is now turned around. And as the temperature goes up, largemouth bass will be benefited, walleye take a dip. And this is from a map, an interactive map that was put out by the Fisheries Center right here at Stevens Point. And you can go to it by region in the state, and you can see how the lakes are likely to change over the next 50 to 60 years. And you will see a lot of the blue waters that are walleye waters change to red and purple. They're going away from being walleye waters, and they're turning into bass sunfish waters. Okay, now, in the past few years, with climate change, one of the biggest things about climate change is not just warmer or longer growing season, it's extreme. For people who are looking for a better term to call climate change, remember global warming didn't really make it. It implies things that are not really true. And climate change has become a dirty word in some sectors. But if you talk to the same people and you use a term like this weird weather we've been having, then they can relate. Well, this weird weather we've been having entails things like a jump from 2012, which was the earliest spring on record, to 2013 and 14, which were two of the most severe winters we ever had. And what we're getting is these bouncing between extreme events, not only between years, but within years, within seasons. And the weird thing about it is for walleye, you would think in a late spring, late ice out, cold spring supposedly, that you would have poor walleye reproduction. And in an early spring, like 2012, where I was crappie fishing on the Chippewa flowage on March 15th in open water, that those would be the good walleye reproduction years. That's just sort of intuitive thinking. It's exactly the opposite. Why? 2013 and 14, we got quite good year classes of walleye, where 2012, which was the earliest ice out on record, it was a complete bust. Why? Early ice out, poor walleye reproduction. Yes. Late ice out, much better walleye reproduction. And we're having more early ice outs recently. That equates to fewer and fewer walleyes and less reproduction. Well, why? Why? Doesn't seem correct. The thermal information, just straight thermal information on spawning success and how young walleye do and how they grow seems to indicate that warmer water might actually benefit them, but that's not happening. This is what I think it is. I think it's what a thing called a bounce. I think it's in those years that are late ice outs, those are the years where we get constant or slowly warming conditions after the ice goes out. Yeah, it's cold early and the winter holds on, but once the winter is gone, we tend to get nice gradual warming conditions, and this is good for the food base. However, in those springs, like 2012, and this is actual information from 2012, where the ice went out really, really early, March 15th, but then the water temperature bounced around horribly for a month or two. It was jumping between a low of 48 and a high of 72 and then back again. What that does is, it wouldn't be bad for just walleye fry. Walleye fry can survive that type of temperature bounce quite easily, as it turns out, but they need food. And when a walleye absorbs its yolk sac and it's looking around for something to eat, it needs to have exactly the right plankton, of exactly the right size, in exactly the right place, in exactly the right abundance. And when you've had these water temperature bounce arounds, that's when the food base, the zooplankton in particular, just can't do it. They can't make it. They don't have a high population. So a walleye might hatch out early, look around for food, there's none there, and they starve. This is the current hypothesis of what's going on, and it seems to fit the result. Okay, the whole reason we even got that saying at the Northern Water School was to repeat my 1978 survey and see what was going on with the cisco. Now the cisco here, whoa, boy. Is a cold water fish. Let's see if I can go right this time. Okay. Cold water fish. They live down in the middle of the lake. They need an oxygenated cold water layer in the middle of the lake. And back in 1978, Lac Courte Oreilles had lots of them. In 1978, in 10 seine halls, we sampled 475 cisco, and they had an average length of 7 inches. Cisco are one of these species, as they become more abundant, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So when you see small cisco, like the size of a smelt, you know you've got a lot of them. Let's fast forward ahead to 2016-18. We did even more hauls. We did 24 hauls until we caught one cisco that was 11 inches long. So the cisco are way less abundant and they're way bigger. Both of those point to they have declined massively at Lac Courte Oreilles in that period of time. So it's been a significant decline. Why? Pretty simple limnology. This is a picture of mine that I photographed from, I didn't have the original, so I had to photograph it from another site that I made a report on. And I have now seen it duplicated in about 25 publications, and I haven't been cited in a single one of them. But anyway, I made this figure to point out the fact that in a lake like Courte Oreilles, which is deep, you tend to have thermal stratification from top to bottom. And you're going to always have a mid-layer zone called the thermocline, where the cisco and the whitefish are going to be able to sustain themselves. And you will often have a deep layer where there's good, real low temperature, but no oxygen, because all the oxygen has been used up by the decay of organic matter. And the longer the summer goes, the bigger this zone becomes, and it tends to become, and the thermocline in the area where the cisco and the whitefish can succeed becomes compressed, 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 and in many years, by September, it's gone. But in most years prior to when climate change became obvious, the water temperature up here on the top floor had now declined back down into the 60s or so, where it was comfortable, and the cisco and the whitefish could easily move up into it and survive just by moving upstairs. Now, in 2 out of 3 summers, September is a summer month. And because that growing season has been extended and there's more decay in that bottom zone is moving up and up and up and compressing that. And we have run into situations where there are fish kills because the Cisco had a decision to make. Do I want to stay down here where the temperature is nice, but I can't breathe anymore? Or do I want to go up where the temperature is really way too hot, but I do have some oxygen to breathe? Causes massive fish kills. And it's not a minor thing, because the cisco is the base forage fish in lakes like Courte Oreilles. It's the reason why Lake Courte Oreilles produces world record muskies and very large walleyes and very large smallmouth bass. It's the key prey species in that lake. And when it goes away, the entire fish community is going to shift. Let's say a little bit about some other cold water species. I'm also on a group called WICI, Wisconsin Climate Change Institute. This is basically a consortium of biologists from the DNR, including retired biologists like me and university people. And we did a bunch of modeling for cold water species under various thermal scenarios on what might happen to, say, brook trout in Wisconsin. The most optimistic fantasy world projection is brook trout are gonna over the next century will decline at least 44%. Under the worst situation, they're gone. Forget it. Your great-great-grandchildren may not see brook trout. That's pretty dire. Again, my type stream for big thermally challenged trout waters is the Namekagon River in Glenroe, Wisconsin. There's a picture of it. It's a big stream, got a lot of cover. It's got good water quality. Most of the year it has good temperature. It's one of the nation's first designated wild and scenic rivers. For that, we can thank Gaylord Nelson. Brown trout are the key species here. You're looking for brown trout, it's well camouflaged, but there's one right there in the river. There's a brook trout spawning at the mouth of Cap Creek. Yes, there are brook trout in the river. They were originally a native species in the river. They were present and abundant in the river when Mary Orvis Marbury wrote her book on famous flies of the United States in about 1887 or so. But that's right in the middle of the logging period. When the first logging period was over in about 1900, it was over for the brook trout. Brook trout are never coming back to Namekagon River. It's way too warm. You can catch them in the winter months when they move down into the river. You can catch them in the tributaries where they're still quite abundant and it's cold enough, but they're never coming back to the mainstream Namekagon in any major abundance and any major distribution. The king of the river now is the brown trout, and you can see why, because the brown trout have a much higher thermal tolerance. Brown trout, you don't start to worry about brown trout until the water temperature reaches about 23 degrees C, which is low to mid-70s. However, brook trout, at anything even close to 20 degrees C or 69 degrees Fahrenheit, they're toast. They're moving. They can't survive there, and they will move into cold water tributaries. Well, look at the river. Look at the thermal signature of this river. It's hardly ever brook trout habitat in the summer months. And it is way warmer than the textbooks tell us that brown trout will survive it for a vast majority of the time. All the way up to temperatures close to 80 degrees. And yet, I have sampled brown trout in the Namekagon River at temperatures of 75 degrees Fahrenheit that were actively feeding in mid-water. The textbooks tell us that for normal brown trout, this cannot, should not, does not happen. These are not normal brown trout. These are brown trout that are thermally, genetically adapted to sustain themselves and thrive in what would be considered warm water conditions for a cold water species. And we are missing the boat by not utilizing these genetics. Because for the normal, quote-unquote, brown trout, under the worst conditions, we're going to lose most of them, 88%. But under the Pollyanna fantasy world limited warming scenario, we may lose 8 to 10%. It's more likely we may lose about 33% of our brown trout waters. Again, due to what? Due to climate change, due to warmer temperatures in the summer. And summer is key here. Here's a record of brown trout reproduction over a long period of time, starting in 1991, going to 2011. I could extend the same graph now, we'd have the same. But what it shows is, starting at about the year 2000 or so, a major, whoa, again. Go back. A major increase in reproduction. Prior to that time, in the Namekagon, every once in a while, we would see a little bit of reproduction. Every third or fourth year, we'd get some. But it was pretty tough on the brown trout. And in recent years, we've had some phenomenal year classes. And two things stick out about this. First of all, those year classes correspond to mild winters, okay? Another thing that's going on is we've had some massive floods in this period. And something about the Namekagon River, about the habitat of the river, makes those young trout, the baby trout, not as acceptable to being washed out by floods than in a typical stream. Because all literature says, if you get summer flooding, it's going to wipe out brown trout reproduction. It doesn't in the Namekagon River. The Namekagon River, for one thing, is a very stable flow river. And what would be considered flood conditions in the Namekagon River might be considered just normal conditions in a stream like maybe the Plover. And harsh winters. Harsh winters correspond to major hits in the brown trout population. Not just the young trout, but also the adult trout. And it's probably due to this thing called anchor ice. When you have really cold weather without much snow cover and low water conditions in particular, you get the ice that builds up on the bottom, from the bottom rather than on the surface. To the point where you end up with these ice caves in the river that trout go into and get lost in. Or to the extent where you have damming of the river, and it'll create these huge backwater areas, and then the dams just blow out and fish are stranded up on the banks. I observed a situation where there was ice damming, the ice dam went out, and there were 35 to 40 large brown trout stranded up on a lawn adjacent to the river. And this is happening less and less now that we're having these severe winters. 2013, 2014, yes, but virtually every other winter since 2000, really mild conditions for trout, a lot of reproduction. Just a summary of all the trout stuff. The important thing is that genetics could be key. Wiki Study has done some good projections, and brook trout, they're on the ropes, definitely on the ropes. Brown trout, maybe they can survive. And I'm a big watershed guy. When I'm talking here about the Namekagon River is a river with a really healthy watershed. Very little agriculture, a lot of public land, completely controlled on a stream fed by the Federal Wild and Scenic River and Park Service, tremendous amounts of county forest and even private forest in the watershed. It's a very healthy watershed. Water goes through the ground, it becomes groundwater, it doesn't run off, you don't get these huge flood events, you have a very stable flow, you have a very stable environment. You all know the water cycle, but it's key. Water falls to the ground, and it either runs off, goes into the ground, or gets evaporated back up in the atmosphere, and then comes back again. And in situations where there's lots of runoff, where you don't have much protection of the watershed, we have a lot of ag, we have a lot of impervious surfaces, we have a lot of residential development. Those are the areas where you get the big floods. So you have huge flows followed by a very little base flow. It either floods or dries up. And why is this important? It's increasingly important under climate change in Wisconsin in general, because it sure looks like not only are our temperatures increasing, and our summer temperatures increasing, but our precipitation patterns, how we are getting our water, it sure looks like it's changed radically. We used to get most of our water from snow melt in the spring. Now we get most of our water from these giant superstorms, 250, 500, even 1,000-year expected storms in the middle of summer. We're getting 3 to 5 of those every summer. We're getting these giant flood events. Ashland has all but washed out twice in the last 5 years. So watershed health. The more forest, the more vegetation in general, the better. The more ag, the more residential development, the more impervious surfaces, the more roads, the more rooftops. Without mitigating that runoff, the worse it is. Because the water runs off the surface, it doesn't go down in the ground, it doesn't come out as nice cold water, and when it runs off at the surface, it's carrying a tremendous number of nutrients with it, particularly phosphorus. The first time I gave this presentation about a year ago, the #1 critique of the first one I gave was, yeah, that's all doom and gloom though. What have you told me? What can I do? What are the solutions? What role do I play? So I thought about it a little bit and I came up with a few. Well, first of all, any effort whatsoever to go away from carbon and go to electrons or alternative energies for fuel to run our cars, to power anything in a house, to power a whole house, get off the grid, that's good. That's good. We cannot continue to burn carbon at the rate we are burning. We're already past a point that might actually be a tipping point now. We need to transition to alternative energy. And the United Nations report says we need to do that within the next 10 to 12 years, or the human race is basically doomed. I don't know if it's that dire, but it's pretty dire. And, okay, what can we do local? Local efforts, community efforts are good. Watershed level efforts are good. Anything you can do in your own personal watershed to do buffer zone is good. If you live on a lake and you have a natural buffer zone or plant one, you are limiting 75, you are reducing the phosphorus load off your property and the back watershed 75%. If you have farm fields or cornfields, if you have buffer zones and green zones, you're reducing the phosphorus input to the nearest water 75%. Okay, we got, I know there's people who stayed home tonight to watch the presidential debates. That's what you can do as a voter is huge. It's huge. If you're voting for candidates that deny climate change, you might as well put a gun to your kids' heads. If you're voting for candidates that at least admit climate change, and in particular candidates that have programs to do something about climate change, you're being a responsible citizen. Did I preach a little much? I'm sorry. One thing that I saw like is the Citizens Climate Lobby carbon, I call it a dividend. It's going to require a paradigm shift in how we do money, how we do taxes, how we support government, and what government does for us. I don't know if it can work, because I'm not sure the government can be trusted to give the money back to the people. But it certainly is worth a try. And everything we do should be done with a future view toward, I don't know, back in 1979, the Moody Blues did an album called To Our Children's Children's Children. I would say that's the sentiment. Those things that we're doing now should be sort of responsible, try to be responsible of future generations. We shouldn't be passing on all the problems that we've created to our children, our children's children. And we need to start now, we really do. And I feel like the world's biggest hypocrite, because I just drove down here in a RAV4, which is a feeling, you know, for its type of vehicle, energy efficient vehicle. But I drove, what was it, Rosie, 249 miles down, 249 miles back. That's 500 miles worth of carbon footprint. So I'm being the world's biggest hypocrite when I'm standing here preaching at you. but we really do have to start. And energy efficient vehicles have got to become prominent within the next decade or so. Future view, okay, from what I've shown you here, you can say for the fish, it looks like a wash, depending upon what you like. If you're a trout fisherman or a walleye fisherman, you're bummed out. If you're a bass fisherman or a sunfish or a catfish fisherman, things are going to get nothing but better. But you need to temper this with this warning, okay? Some of the things I'm talking about for fish, for cold water fishing in general, they are canaries in the coal mine. Not only might our granddaughters and grandsons not ever see or touch a brook trout, but if it gets to the point where brook trout are extinct, there's going to be some things going on in their lives which are maybe a lot more important than the fishery. Like the ocean is moved in 200 miles inland, and 60% of our population has to move and go inland. Think about the civil unrest and all the things that might be going on. So I don't like to preach doom and gloom, but I'd say we better get our act together now. Oh, and this is Audubon Society, okay? So I'm supposed to be talking birds.
Fish are okay.
Fish are just like birds. There are some birds that are going to thrive in warmer temperatures and wetter summers, and I'm sure there's some like penguins or something like that that are not going to do too well under increasingly warm conditions. But the same principles hold. There are going to be some species in the bird community that are going to benefit, and some that are not going to benefit. Okay, here's my extra credit take-home test. Rosie and I went to a fish fry, probably 10 years ago. And at that fish fry, the girl came out and said, you know, we have a choice today. You can have either the Icelandic cod or whatever they were naming, whatever trash marine fish they were trying to tell us. Or you can have 5 bluegill fillets. And immediately my red flag went up, just like I tell her. I'm saying to myself, where did they get bluegills? You can't commercial. Because maybe the Native Americans, but I didn't know of any Native American fishery for panfish. And maybe the only commercial fishery I could think of would be the Lake Nipissing commercial fishery in southern Ontario, Canada, that sends a lot of mostly northern pike down here, but maybe there's also panfish there, so maybe panfish went well. So I asked the waitress, and she sort of scratched her head and said, I don't know where they're coming from, I'll get you an answer. Well, anyway, I ordered the Icelandic cod, but at the end of the night, she came and said, well, I got all this skivvy on those bluegill. They're coming from Red China. They're cage reared in the new impoundment that they built on the Yangtze River or whatever it is, which is a gigantic ecological disaster, to say the least. And they're hybrids between bluegill and red-eared sunfish and bluegill and green sunfish. I said, thank you very much. I'm glad I passed that. So your assignment is, you go out to Lake Dubay with your family and you hook and line catch 5 bluegill. Or you go into that restaurant and you order 5 bluegills from China. Compare the carbon footprint. And when you have the answer, send it to me, because I have no idea how to compute that, none whatsoever. But I just know intuitively the carbon footprint difference has to be gigantic, because eat local is also one of the things we should be doing more of, because we not only get better food, but there's less waste, and there's nowhere near the carbon footprint for fertilizer or transport on any of that stuff. So with that, I'd like to say for me, this is a little brook trout fly that I tied myself in 2019. Looks pretty nice. And I just hope we don't get to the point where the only brook trout there is on the planet is this fly. So with that, any questions?
We use coppers.
Yes. Question number 1.
Yeah, I live on Lake Dubay, and I
Okay.
fished it regularly for 23 years.
Yeah.
Same spot, May and June, same depth, same bait. Boy, I have had a huge change in what I catch. Using minnows of various sizes and fishing near the bottom of the lake, I used to catch a majority of walleyes and maybe an occasional, rarely a bullhead and occasionally a channel catfish. Now I'd say 80% of my fish are channel catfish, a few bullheads, and the remaining 15% are small walleyes. And I still catch walleyes, but it's a really different situation than 20 or 23 years ago.
So you would agree with my assessment?
I would,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Basically-
I wanted to remind people that the official state fish of Wisconsin is the brook trout, and it's native, and the brown trout is not native. It came from Germany, didn't it?
Came from Germany, Austria, France, and Ireland, the three sources, four sources. But I also like to say that we're a little bit too bent out of shape over quote-unquote invasive species. The brown trout has been naturalized and is self-sustaining and part of the fish communities since about 1900. And in streams like the Namekagon, it's not a choice between brook trout and brown trout. It's a choice between trout and no trout.
And my last comment is about, he mentioned phosphorus and flooding and how all these nutrients come in. Make sure you realize that phosphorus for most lakes is the limiting nutrient, meaning more phosphorus means more algae and phytoplankton, right? And, you know, algae blooms, and that's not what you want to see.
And there's more than enough phosphorus to make a lake eutrophied naturally in our soils. And the main way that phosphorus gets into a lake, soluble phosphorus isn't really soluble phosphorus, it's phosphorus that adheres to soil particles and gets transported in water as erosion.
Right.
I always tell my students, I say, the more questions there are, the better I know the class is. The gentleman way in the back.
So are there similar studies and similar results across the northern tier of the country or the upper Midwest in terms of what you're...
The question is, are there similar studies and similar results? And the fact is, totally the same results everywhere, and the results are, you can go right across northern New York State, Minnesota, wherever, and you're going to see the same trend. Cold water species declining, warm water species, especially the sunfish and centracus and the catfish increasing. It's a large, it's right across, it's worldwide. It's not a little local thing, just a little blurb in the ground. It's an absolute massive event. Any other questions? You're at about D+ level here with 2 points.
I would just say this one, that the bluegill fishing on the Chippewa flowage has been really good.
Yeah, we had a comment that bluegill fishing on Chippewa flowage has been really good lately.
Last
That's a
few years have
perfect
been
example.
outstanding, yeah.
The flowage is one of the few waters that's probably still going to have walleye in the year 2100, but they will be at a reduced level, and the sunfish have done remarkably well. When I first started the state in 1974 as part of the first Chippewa flowage survey, I got to run the boom sharker for that survey for Russ Dunst. And we ran that boom sharker every night for an entire summer. And we only got like 2 bluegills and 1 largemouth bass and like 20,000 walleye. It was walleye, and nothing else. Of course, they were all less than 12 inches long, but nobody likes to mention that. But the sunfish were not even a minor part of the fish community. They were so rare you hardly ever saw them. And now, yeah, it's a major fish. And it's going to remain that way. It's probably going to get better.
So you only mentioned muskie once, but I'm one of those crazy people that drive suckers around.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, those lakes, they used to turn over and stay turned over.
Yeah.
And now they're flip-flopping back and forth, just like you
Yeah,
start there.
yeah.
That's got to be detrimental to
And
them.
why didn't I mention muskie? Because muskie, one of those species, is hard to trap. They're way more tolerant to warm water than the northern pike is.
Oh, they really are.
I can say about the northern pike that they're going to take a major hit. They, particularly large northern pike, require have thermal characteristics very similar to brown trout. They're almost a pure cold water species.
And muskie are not. Muskie are more like a largemouth bass in their temperature. So the early predictions would be that northern pike are going to get knocked down. That's going to benefit muskie. And the water temperature is going to get warmer. That's going to benefit muskie at least for a while. So we're waiting to see what it does to muskie. It's going to be interesting. And I couldn't give you a prediction. I would not predict that. That's a finish tonight. The crystal ball is too low.
He had his hand up first.
Walleye recruitment. I fish the river out here and I've observed the last 20 years or so. Our put and take, we have a limit, they only get to be 15 inches and you can take them home. And so they reproduce, and they're reproducing at a smaller size.
Yeah.
Considerably smaller size. And I'm wondering if during this time that we're trying to mitigate this climate change, if we shouldn't pay attention to our slot limits, to be able to hold it over for a little bit longer.
The observation is that walleye recruitment being as vulnerable as it is, we should maybe be thinking more about protecting some of our larger sized fish. And if you had posed this question back to me in 1980, I would say no, it's not a fact. But I can tell you now, it's probably a good insurance policy. Didn't help Lake Mille Lacs, did it? They knew Lake Mille Lacs was headed in the wrong direction, and they initiated all sorts of slot size limits, which were very, very successful in preserving big fish to catch, but eventually there still wasn't any reproduction, and everything crashed. And Lake Mille Lacs is not even a walleye lake. So went from one of the best in the world to a virtual non-entity as a walleye fishery in 20 years. Gentleman right here.
What about the,
Yeah,
We're
you're on stage.
Go ahead.
okay, I was
Man with
just
brown
wondering,
shirt and a vest.
what
Come on
about the
up.
Great Lakes? The larger bodies of water, what's happening there, like Lake Michigan, Lake Superior?
He's talking about the Great Lakes and the effect of climate change on the Great Lakes. And if anything, over time, the changes may be even greater. And because the thing with the Great Lakes is they influence the atmosphere so much. And as the water gets warmer in the Great Lakes, and it has, like Schwamigan Bay and Lake Superior, for example, never used to get above 70 degrees in the summertime. It would support brook trout in the shallow water zone, coastal brook trout. And now it routinely gets as warm as any inland lake. Well, warm water over that big a lake surface means more what? Evaporation, which means more rainfall in immediately adjacent areas, which means more erosion, more turbidity, more nutrients, more flooding, etc. So the Great Lakes are a player, not just from the standpoint of their own fisheries, but from the standpoint of being some of the solar battery, I guess you call it, to run the whole system in terms of rainfall and precipitation.
I have a question. I'm a bird person, so I know a little bit about the air, but I should be worried about my bird species that need fish for food. And what can we do? Is there any help in adding oxygen to that lower level of lakes? Is that too expensive to do?
Oh, in terms of like Lac Courte Oreilles,
Yeah.
I'm on record as saying in the comment period for the new phosphorus standard for Lac Courte Oreilles that a 10 part per billion phosphorus standard was recommended to the DNR. The DNR rejected it. The EPA is still considering it, but I'm on record as saying that probably not going to be good enough, and it probably will require what's called metal linemetic or thermocline aeration, like they do routinely in Europe in some of their large lakes. Lake Constance, Lake Geneva. There's a number of lakes in the Alps in Switzerland that are large cold water lakes, and they've had nutrient problems and eutrophication problems, and they are aerating some of these lakes with aeration systems in the mid-water zone, in the cold water zone, with aeration systems which are just Star Wars type of aeration systems, and they literally cost millions of dollars in electric power every year to run. But that may be what is necessary to keep a few of these cisco lakes and whitefish lakes as cisco and whitefish lake. It's just too many nutrients, the growing season is too long now.
That's another part of my question. When I first moved here in '67, they were talking about Cisco and Sunset Lake, which is a deep lake.
Yep.
Are you familiar with Sunset Lake?
Yeah, I'm familiar with
Are there
Sunset.
still any evidence of that?
I saw in the latest,
Deep water?
I saw in the latest DNR Cisco study in year 2016, I think they sampled one Cisco there. The Cisco lakes down here that I saw on that, in that data set impressed me even less than my lakes that I know are floundering. They weren't that much to begin with, and they're even less now. You're so much farther south. Farther south you go, the greater this stuff magnifies. And if you want a predictor of where your fishery or where your climate or where your birds are going to be 20 years down the road, go and look at, say, middle Illinois right now. And maybe 20 years down the road, middle Missouri. 30 years down the road, maybe northern Mississippi. That's the way it's going. You're up to about a B- level. Right here.
Oh, okay. We went up to Alaska on a vacation, and at one point, the walleyes quit. You couldn't get a walleye. It was too far north. But we were almost all the way to the Arctic Circle,
Right.
and we were still catching northerns.
Yeah.
So it kind of proves you.
Well, northern pike are even more of a cold water species. Northern pike are close to a cold water species, and walleye are close to a warm water species. So yes, the distribution will show that. Interesting, I used to always say when people were doubters and deniers, I saw largemouth bass move halfway to the northern circle, to the Arctic Circle over the course of 20 years. We're catching largemouth bass in a lake that 20 years ago we visited. We were only catching northerns, and now there are largemouth bass. So the southern species are moving north, and the north species are moving north. Unfortunately, they're moving north at the tail end of their distribution, and the warm water species are moving north at the front end of the distribution. That's a great observation.
Back to the small fish. When I moved here in my late 60s, on my little lake, Palin Lake, there were sticklebacks, blunt-nosed minnows,
Yep.
and bullheads. I haven't seen those now for over a decade.
Yeah,
Are they doing poorly as well?
that's a great question. Some of these species we don't know. In the minnow group, the research tends to indicate that some of the larger omnivorous minnows like the creek chouse and spot-tailed shiner are probably going to do really, really well. But some of those other species you mentioned, like brook stickleback, they're a cool water species. What were the other ones? Bullheads certainly aren't. Bullheads are the ultimate warm water species. So there may be something else going on in your lake.
Winter kill.
Winter kill is a big one. And another thing about climate change, some lakes that used to be winter kill lakes with no fishery at all now have fantastic fisheries due to the fact that the winters are so much milder.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh boy, we're pushing a B+ now.
Well, I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a plug for the Wisconsin Fish ID app.
Oh, yeah, the Wisconsin Fish ID app. John Lyons is very responsible for that. John Lyons is a good friend of mine, just recently retired fisheries research biologist, world-renowned, and between Becker's database and John Lyons editing it is a fantastic site to go and ID fish and get information about individual species of fish.
It's free.
It's free, too. I don't necessarily like all those apps, but anything that has to do with fish, I like.
What's the site you go to? What's the exact site?
It's Wisconsin Fish ID.
Wisconsin Fish ID.
Yeah, it has a picture of a fish on
And the
it.
way I would do it, I just would Google Wisconsin Fish ID. And have it, one or two, be within the top one or two of the three choices. That was a plug for Google as a search engine.
You mentioned early on the cold water lake trout in Lucerne.
Yeah,
Were you referring to the Lucerne in Forest County?
yeah.
For the last year, I've been the chair of the Fishery and Habitat Committee, and we've been having some really interesting discussions about what the future of Lucerne is. So I mean, one of the goals has been to try to put in some fish sticks, but the issue is, I mean, is that going to favor the bass over
That's a great
the
question.
walleye,
Question
the
is-
walleye initiative
The question
that they're
is,
doing?
you got a lake that's a walleye lake, you got a lake that's potentially two-story lake, doesn't have a lot of inshore cover, and it would appear that fish sticks are adding wood cover to the shoreline would be a good stroke of business. And I would put away my concerns about individual species. I have seen lakes where fish sticks have been put in where it hasn't influenced the fish community structure, but it's been overall beneficial. What you need to know is, back before logging in Wisconsin, in any lakes that were in forested areas, historical records, photographs, etc., show that there were 500 to 1,000 pieces of big wood per mile of shoreline. It's about 20 now. So you could add wood until the cows come home and not get back to baseline natural. So when it comes to adding habitat, particularly in terms of wood, I'm the #1 proponent of it. Just keep dumping logs and fish sticks and whatever else, and don't ever stop. It's going to benefit the fishery, and it won't hurt them. The more cover, the better. The more habitat, the better. We took it all away with logging. Logging was like, the first logging that was done, the initial logging of white pine and hemlock and cedar in the late 1800s, mid-1800s, would be equivalent to a nuclear war right now in terms of destroying watersheds and limiting habitat. So we almost can't do enough to mitigate that. And now we're faced with climate change on top of that. So get truckloads of wood and start dumping it and don't stop.
Don't cut your
My
stone.
understanding is that the wood doesn't help the walleye as much as it does some of the other.
Wood definitely, in terms of you were saying, does wood benefit walleye more than bass? It probably benefits bass more. But a key item would be that bass that are inshore, that are hiding under cover, waiting to ambush something, are way less dangerous to walleye than bass that are forced to be roving offshore. Those are the bass that really chow down on walleyes. So if you move the bass out of the offshore zone and you put them in the inshore zone where they normally occur, you're going to have less predation. That would be my prediction. So I think it would indirectly benefit walleye and directly benefit bass.
It would just help the whole ecology. of the
Back
lake.
up the trucks and start dumping.
Christmas trees. Line the trout stream with Christmas trees.
The more wood, the better. The more wood, the better. I've been trying for 40 years to get the Park Service to approve the limited wood project for the Namekagon River. I spent 18 years on an environmental impact study, and we had them just about ready to go and to bite to do one little experimental zone to add 500 pieces of wood. And at the last minute, they backed out because they were so afraid that brown trout would dominate brook trout. Brown trout are already dominating brook trout, and the brook trout are not there because there's no longer any brook trout habitat. It has nothing to do with the wood. Okay, you're almost at A- level. Oh, one more, okay. The gentleman with the white hair. Good enough? Okay. Great audience. Incidentally, this is my 19th presentation. I keep changing a little bit every time. And the audiences keep getting better.